A sledgehammer hit the basement wall, and the false stone gave way. Behind it, a steel vault door, untouched for 40 years. Sheriff Mason cut the lock. The crowd on the stairs expected nothing. Drugs, maybe a body. The door swung open. Light from dozens of flashlights hit gold bars stacked floor to ceiling. Crates marked Ashford Industries patent originals, sealed legal binders, and on the far wall, a portrait of a man with sharp gray eyes. CEO Caroline Ashford stopped breathing. The eyes were her father's. He had been dead 8 years. Daniel had owned the house 6 months. 6 months earlier, early October, the old Ford pickup rattled across the iron bridge into Ridgemont, New York. Daniel Whitaker drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting flat on the bench seat above where his daughter slept. Lily was 8. She had her mother's sketchbook open in her lap, bent into a shape that fit her chest. She had been holding it that way since they left Boston, 3 blocks of Main Street. A cafe with a hand-lettered window, a used bookstore that doubled as a post office, a single law office. Maple leaves the color of old wine. Daniel parked and lifted Lily down. She rubbed her eyes and looked around without comment. The attorney was Harlan Reese, who had handled trustee sales in Columbia County for 40 years. He tapped the deed with the back of a pen. Old Ashford Place. Sat empty 38 years. Last person to live in it was an Edward Ashford, uncle to the original Harrison. Died in 72. Family washed their hands. 3 speculative owners since. Each one looked at the roof and ran. Daniel signed. $172,000. Cash from the sale of his Beacon Hill townhouse. Reese paused with the deed. Mr. Whitaker, you sure? That roof alone? I'm sure. By lunch at the Maple Street Diner, 2 waitresses and a retired farmer had already settled the matter. Some city man bought the Ashford ruin. Brought a little girl. No wife in sight. 80 miles south in Albany, Margaret Hollis stood at her kitchen counter with a cup of tea and a tablet propped against the sugar bowl. Retired from Ashford Industries 9 years, she still ran a daily search on every old family property. Her tea cooled while she read the listing notice. She picked up her phone. Caroline Ashford was on the 17th floor of company headquarters when her phone vibrated. She read the screen, stood up, and walked out of the Margins meeting without a word. Caroline. The Ridgemont house. It sold. Caroline stood in the corridor with one hand against the glass wall. 3 times in the last 2 years of his life, her father had said the word Ridgemont, each time like a man who had set something down and meant to come back for it. Margaret, I'm driving up tomorrow. The next morning she pointed the gray Audi north on Interstate 87. She parked at the foot of the hill and walked the gravel drive up alone. Daniel was on a ladder, prying boards off the parlor windows. He heard her shoes on the stones and turned. Caroline Ashford. My family used to own this property. I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes. He came down the ladder, wiped his palms on his jeans, shook her hand, did not invite her inside. They stood on the porch. She asked whether the previous owners had left anything. Papers, photographs, anything bearing the Ashford name. He shook his head. The house had been empty when he bought it. She left a card. If you find anything, please call. Personal cell, not the office. He read it. Caroline Ashford, CEO, Ashford Industries. Industries. Like the aerospace company? She nodded. He did not ask another question. He slipped the card into his shirt pocket. On the drive south, she put Margaret on Bluetooth. Margaret. Did my father ever talk about that house? Really talk? 3 seconds of silence. Yes, dear. Once, the week before he died. That evening, in the empty kitchen of the house on the hill, Daniel stood with Caroline's card pinched between his fingers. He heard footsteps in the back garden. Daddy, there's a stone with letters on it. He followed his daughter out. In the corner of the old foundation, half buried in weeds, lay a flat granite cornerstone. Daniel brushed the dirt away. Hand-carved, deep, clean, TW 1986. He knelt. He set his hand over his father's mark. Thomas Whitaker had never said a single word about this house. Not in 30 years. 2 weeks passed. Lily started 3rd grade at Ridgemont Elementary. Daniel worked from morning until he picked her up at 3, and then again from dinner until he could not see straight. He did the survey himself. The walls were plumb. The sills sound. The roof had failed in 2 places only. The foundation held him. He squatted in the basement one morning with a flashlight aimed at the mortar joints along the east wall. Hudson Valley granite, hand set. The pointing was original 1888 in most places, but a section perhaps 15 feet wide, floor to ceiling, was different. Same stone, newer mortar. He scraped a thumbnail along the joint. Whoever did this was a master, he said to no one. He did not recognize the work. That afternoon Caroline drove up for the second time. She had been going through her father's personal papers in the executive safe, papers no one had opened in 8 years. Among them she found a small leather notebook from 1997, one line in his handwriting, Ridgemont. Check foundation east wall before winter. She brought the notebook with her. Daniel was washing his hands at the kitchen sink when she knocked. She showed him the line. I checked the east wall this morning, he said. And? There's repair work. Late 1980s, judging by the mortar. Caroline tilted her head. You can date masonry that precisely. I've worked with old houses. They went down the basement stairs together. She was the CEO of a precision engineering firm. She had grown up climbing scaffolds with her father. She touched the east wall. Someone rebuilt this. Recently, late 1980s. How recently after the original construction? 100 years. Give or take a year. They went back upstairs. He made coffee. She did not stay long. While they sat on the porch, Margaret Hollis was 3 miles away at the Maple Street diner. She glanced up as Daniel came in for coffee. He did not see her. She set down her sandwich. The face. She drove home and went to the spare bedroom where she kept her old work boxes. She had been Harrison Ashford's executive assistant since 1976 and had kept every photograph he ever asked her to keep. She found the Polaroid in a manila envelope marked Hudson Valley, 1986. 2 men stood on the front porch of the Ridgemont house. Younger. The siding was painted, the railing straight. Harrison Ashford on the left, lean and tall in a wool cardigan, his hand on the shoulder of a second man. The second man taller, broader, in a flannel shirt the color of slate, his face serious in the way of men who did precise work for a living. And at the second man's hip, half hidden behind his leg, stood a boy of 10, holding a small mason's trowel, his chin tilted up toward his father's profile in the angle of a child who wanted his father to look at him. Margaret carried the photograph to the kitchen window. She lifted a magnifying glass off her crossword puzzle. She knew the boy. She had read about him last summer in the New York Times Magazine. 5 pages, a black and white portrait. Daniel Whitaker, recipient of the Driehaus Prize for Classical Architecture. The article had ended with a paragraph, noting that he had dissolved his Boston firm after the death of his wife. She did not call Caroline. She poured herself a glass of water and sat at the table for 10 minutes. She picked up the phone. Caroline, drive up tomorrow morning. There's a photograph you need to see. We need to be careful what we say to Mr. Whitaker. And when, that evening on the hill, Daniel boiled pasta and grated Parmesan into a bowl. Lily knelt on her chair so she could reach the cheese. Daniel said, Your Grandpa Thomas worked on houses like this one when I was your age. Sometimes I went with him on Saturdays. He gave me a small trowel and let me think I was helping. Lily considered. Did he build this house? I don't know. But somebody who built the way he did. Maybe it was his friend. Daniel smiled. Maybe. In Albany at midnight, Margaret sat alone with the Polaroid under her reading lamp. She looked at the boy. Harrison, you old fox, she said. You sent the son back to finish what the father started. The next morning, Caroline drove up. Margaret laid the Polaroid on the kitchen table before Caroline sat down. Caroline did not touch the photograph for almost a full minute. She studied it the way one studies an X-ray. Her father's hand was on the other man's shoulder. Not the camera-friendly half-grip Harrison used at company dinners. This was the grip of a brother. Who is the man? Thomas Whitaker, a stonemason out of Hudson. Your father called him the finest in the eastern United States. He died 7 years ago, the year after your father. And the boy? Margaret refilled her coffee with a steady hand. The boy is now living in your father's Ridgemont house. Caroline set the photograph down. She did not speak for some time. Margaret explained. From late 1985 to early 1987, every other weekend, Harrison had told the office he was going to the Hudson Valley to fish. He brought back no fish. Margaret had filed his expense reports and known better than to wonder aloud. Caroline drove home to Albany that afternoon. She opened her laptop and searched the name. Driehaus Prize, 2018. Dissolved Whitaker Preservation, 2024. A Boston Globe feature with Daniel standing in front of a restored chapel, sleeves rolled up, eyes refusing the camera. She did not yet know what her father had been doing in Ridgemont. She knew only that he had chosen this man's father, and that the son had come back. The same day, 80 miles north, Richard Vance was making his own phone call. Vance had a man on retainer in Hudson, a small-time broker named Cudahy, paid a flat monthly fee for one job. Alert Vance the moment any property tied to the Ashford family moved on the open market. Cudahy had earned his retainer that week. Vance drove up himself on Thursday afternoon. He wore a soft barn coat instead of a suit. He stopped at the diner and made small talk with the waitress. He drove up the gravel drive at 20 miles an hour and got out smiling. Daniel met him on the porch. Richard Vance, Ashford Industries. We've been scouting properties for a small executive retreat. Yours would suit us perfectly. I'd like to make you an offer. Daniel asked him to sit. Vance sat. Lily did not come out. The offer was $850,000 cash. Close in 14 days. Daniel listened the way a man listens to weather he cannot stop. When Vance was done, Daniel said, "Mr. Vance, the answer is no. The house isn't for sale at any price." Vance smiled in the small, even way of a man whose smile had survived worse refusals. Think about it overnight. The numbers on the card. On the highway, he made one call to a man he kept on a payroll that did not appear on tax filings. He won't sell. Plan B zoning. Blight ordinance. County inspection. I want this property forced to auction within 90 days. That evening, Caroline drove back to Ridgemont. When Daniel opened the door, she said it from the threshold. "Daniel, did you know your father worked for my father?" He went still. "My father worked construction in the Hudson Valley most of his life. He never told me client names." She held out a copy of the Polaroid. He took it. His hands shook just enough for her to see and not enough to mention. The boy in the photograph. The cardigan. Thomas standing the way Daniel still stood, weight on the back foot, jaw level. He did not remember the day, but his 10-year-old face remembered it for him. "I don't remember coming here, but I was here." They sat on the porch steps. The light was going. Caroline talked about her father, the careful man, the paranoid last year, the funeral she had been told to keep small. Daniel talked about his father, the stroke in the workshop at 70. The screen door creaked. Lily came out with a small glass jar in both hands, pressed maple leaves between the panes. "For you," she said to Caroline. "Because you came back." Caroline took the jar with the care she would have given to a tray of vials in a laboratory. "Thank you, Lily." Daniel watched. 100 miles south, Vance was in the back of a town car telling his secretary to set a board meeting for Tuesday. He was preparing to steal more while he still could. On Monday morning, Daniel began work on the parlor. The east wall was not original to 1888. He could see it from 20 feet away. He removed the trim by hand and pulled the lath one strip at a time. He was halfway across when the lath in his hand resisted in a way the others had not. A small metal box, set flush into the wall. Steel, no rust. He brought the box out and set it on the kitchen table, and washed his hands before opening it. Inside lay a single sheet, rolled, tied with faded red ribbon. Heavy paper, hand-drawn, soft yellow at the edges. He untied the ribbon and weighted the corners with 2 coffee cups. A basement floor plan. The same basement under his feet. Every dimension hand-noted. The east wall marked with a thin double line and a small notation in pencil, service alcove. TW. The signature at the bottom. Harrison Ashford. March, 1985. Daniel sat with the blueprint for 2 hours. He did not go down to the basement. He understood the notation system because his father had used it for 40 years on every project Daniel had ever seen him touch. Initials in straight quotes meant work that was the son's to inherit. Initials in slanted quotes meant work that should remain hidden until the right hands came back for it. These were straight quotes. He picked up the phone and called Caroline. "I found something. Can you come up tomorrow morning? Bring whoever you trust most." She brought Margaret. They sat at the kitchen table at 9 in the morning with the blueprint between them. Margaret looked at the page. Her hand trembled. Harrison drew this himself. He never let draftsmen near anything that mattered. He told me once, "If I want something hidden, I draw it myself." and only one other person ever sees the drawing. That one other person, Daniel said, was my father. Caroline laid out the plan in her boardroom voice. They would not open the east wall today. They would do this correctly. Witnessed, recorded, in chain of custody. She wanted Sheriff Tom Mason there. Mason had grown up with Thomas Whitaker. Mason did not bend. Daniel agreed. They set the day. Friday, before dawn. Across the river that Monday afternoon, Vance was already moving. An anonymous email went to the Columbia County Building Department. Unauthorized structural work at the old Ashford house. No permits filed. Possible safety hazard. Please investigate. 2 reporters at the Albany Times-Union received the same tip from a different burner address. The county inspector called Daniel on Wednesday morning. Emergency safety inspection. Friday at 10 in the morning. Not optional. Daniel called Caroline within the hour. She did the math out loud. We open Friday at sunrise, 6 hours before the inspector arrives. By the time any one official sets foot on the property, whatever is in that wall is documented, photographed, and in custody. He walked her out to the Audi that night. The yard was already cold. First frost would come within a week. If my father built something into this house, Daniel said, I'd want him to see it found. Caroline looked up at him. The porch light was warm on her face. If my father hid something here, I want him to see it returned. A pause. Neither of them moved. He raised his hand. He touched her sleeve at the wrist. Only the fabric, not the skin underneath. 2 fingers, briefly. Friday morning. She nodded once and got into the car. Caroline checked into the inn at Ridgemont on Thursday afternoon. Room 12, with a window that faced the river. She had paid for 3 nights. Margaret knocked at 8 that evening. She carried a manila envelope. The paper was the color of old butter. A wax seal, dark red, cracked at one edge but unbroken, held the flap shut. On the front, in her father's pen, for Caroline. Only if she finds the house. Caroline took it without speaking. She sat on the edge of the bed. He gave this to me the week before he died, dear. March of 2017. He told me to hold it. If something happened to him, I was to hold it. He said you would come to me one day asking about Ridgemont. If you never asked, I was to burn it on the 10th anniversary of his death. That's in a year and a half. Yes. Caroline turned the envelope over. You almost burned this. I had been preparing to. I am glad I will not need to. Margaret stepped to the door. I'll leave you alone with it. She went out. Caroline broke the seal with her thumbnail. 4 sheets, folded once, written on both sides in her father's handwriting. She recognized it in the first line. She read the first sentence. Outside, the wind came up off the river and rattled the inn sign. Caroline did not hear it. 3 miles uphill, Daniel was walking the perimeter of his property with a flashlight. He could feel the kind of attention that does not come from animals. At the bottom of the gravel drive, a black SUV sat with its lights off. He could see the dim red point of a cigarette behind the windshield. He turned, walked back 20 paces along the tree line, and used the phone in his pocket to photograph the license plate through a gap in the brush. He sent the photograph to Caroline with no text. Caroline forwarded the image to the Nightline at her legal firm. The reply came back inside 10 minutes. The plate belonged to a vehicle leased by a private intelligence contractor in northern New Jersey. 2 years earlier, Richard Vance had paid that contractor to run a surveillance file on a junior board member who had been about to vote against him. She read her father's letter twice through. Then she dialed Daniel. Daniel. Her voice was different from any voice he had heard her use. I need to come up there. Now, not Friday morning. Tonight. There is something you need to read before we open that wall. Drive carefully, he said. I'll make coffee. She drove the 40 minutes north with the letter folded on the passenger seat. She parked outside the house at 10 minutes to midnight. Daniel opened the door before she knocked. Upstairs, his daughter slept. Caroline laid the 4 sheets on the kitchen table. He wrote this a week before he died. Daniel sat down. He read. She stood at the sink with her back to him, both hands gripping the counter edge, and did not turn. She could not watch him read it. When he finished, he set the pages flat. Silence. He looked up. She had turned around. Caroline, your father didn't trust banks. He didn't trust the company. He didn't trust anyone except my father and you. She nodded once. A single tear fell on the back of her hand on the counter. She did not wipe it away. The kitchen clock ticked. The candle on the windowsill burned down a 1/4 inch. Snow began to fall outside, the first of the season, fine and dry as flour. Daniel folded his hands on the table over the 4 pages and read the letter again in silence. The letter began, "Caroline, if you are reading this, I have been gone long enough that you found your way to the house. Richard Vance has been stealing from the company since the summer of 1985. Small at first. 50,000 here, 200 there. By 1990, he was moving millions through shell entities in the Caymans, Belize, and Liechtenstein. I have proof of every transfer, every signature, every memo. I never confronted him because his father was Senator Vance, and his uncle sat on the federal bench, and in 1988 they made it clear that confronting Richard publicly would mean my family, meaning you, would not be safe. So I made another plan. Over 2 years, I withdrew 40 bars of gold from accounts Richard does not know exist. I removed the original patents from corporate counsel and replaced them with secondary filings. I gathered every piece of evidence, 12 binders, sworn affidavits, bank traces. I built a vault for it. I built it inside the Ridgemont house, the one my uncle abandoned, the one Vance's father once called the Ashford Ruin at a dinner party in 1971. No Vance will ever look there. I built the vault with Thomas Whitaker. He is the finest stonemason in the eastern United States and the only man alive who knows what is in that basement. If something happens to me, find Thomas. He will know how to reach the door. He has the combination. It is built from dates only the 2 of us would think of, and he has memorized it. Caroline, if Richard becomes CEO, fight him. Do not run. The vault is your weapon. The patents alone will let you reclaim the company. The evidence will let you destroy him. I am sorry I could not tell you this in life. I love you more than this paper can hold, Dad." March 3rd, 2017. Daniel set the pages down. Caroline had already read it twice. She knew the fact Daniel had not yet reached. Daniel. Thomas is gone. The only person who knew how to open it is gone. He sat very still. My father kept everything in his head and in his hands, he said. He didn't write things down. If the combination was in his head, it died with him. A long beat, unless. He stood and walked to the sink. He turned his back to her, set both palms flat on the counter, and spoke to the dark window above the faucet. "My father had a safe in our basement when I was growing up. Combination dial, 3 numbers. He told me once, only once, when I was 12 and asked, 'Danny, it's the day your mother and I met, the day you were born, and the day my own father died. You'll remember those numbers your whole life. So will I.'" He turned around. "If he used the same logic for your father's vault, and he would have, then the combination is built from dates important to him and your father. Birthdays, anniversaries, the day they met, the day they finished. I don't know which dates, but I know the structure." Caroline sat down across from him. "Then we figure it out together. Tomorrow morning." He laid his right hand flat on the table between them, palm up. He did not speak. After a long moment, Caroline laid her hand on his. It was not the gesture of romance. It was the gesture of 2 people who had just learned that their fathers had been quiet partners in a thing larger than either of them, and that those fathers were both dead, and that the work was now theirs. She did not pull her hand away. He did not turn his over to lace fingers. They simply rested that way, palms aligned, while the snow built up on the windowsill and the candle went on burning. At 12:45, Daniel called Sheriff Mason. They agreed on a new time, not 7 in the morning. 5. Before dawn. Before Vance. Friday at 4:45. The sky over Ridgemont was the color of slate dust. A thin first snow had stuck to the lawn but not the gravel. Sheriff Tom Mason pulled his cruiser up the drive with the headlights off. Deputy Watkins followed. Margaret Hollis came on the bench seat beside Mason. Caroline had spent the night on the parlor sofa under the wool blanket Daniel kept folded across the armrest. Lily had been driven to the Mason house the evening before for a sleepover with the sheriff's daughter. She was not in the house on the hill. The 5 of them went down the basement stairs together. Daniel led with a high-lumen lamp on a tripod. Margaret carried the manila envelope in both gloved hands. Mason wore his body camera on the front of his jacket, switched on the moment his boot hit the top step. Daniel stopped at the east wall. He set the tripod down. He laid one hand flat on the granite. The stone was cold even through the glove. "Dad," he said quietly, "if you're in there, this is your son. I'm coming." He picked up the sledgehammer. The first strike sounded too loud. Stone dust bloomed into the light. The second strike broke the panel. The third drove a quarter of the false wall straight in. When the dust settled, the lamp caught the steel. A custom vault door, 5 feet tall, 3 feet wide, riveted, hand-forged hinges. In the center, an old combination dial. Daniel knelt. He laid his fingertips on the dial. He recognized the spacing. 3-number combination. Right, left, right. He tried first the dates he knew best. His parents' wedding. His own birth date. Harrison Ashford's birthday from the company's history page. 14/22/8. He turned the handle. Nothing. He sat back on his heels. Wrong. He wouldn't use my numbers. He'd use his and your father's. Caroline sat down on the dusty floor beside him. My parents' anniversary is October 19. My father's birthday, November 8. My father's, July 7. Their anniversary, June 14. From behind them, Margaret spoke. Harrison and Thomas finished the vault on November 11, 1987. I remember because Harrison came back to the office that night with a bottle of Bordeaux and toasted Veterans Day. He never drank Bordeaux otherwise. Daniel met Caroline's eyes. November 11. The day they finished. Then the 2 anniversaries. The 2 marriages that gave them the children they were protecting. He turned the dial. 11 right. Past 0, 2 full turns, then 14 left. Past 0 once, then 19 right. A small mechanical click ran through the door like a sigh. Caroline laid her hand on the steel and pushed. The door opened. The interior of the vault was 8 feet deep, 7 wide. The lamp lit it from the doorway and 4 other flashlights joined. The light hit gold first. 40 bars stacked floor to ceiling along the right wall. The corners chamfered, the assay stamp still legible. Crates of pale pine ran along the left wall, each one stenciled in black. Ashford Industries Patent Originals. Beside the crates, 12 black ring binders stood in a row. The spines read Vance Personal, Transfers 1985 through 2017. On the far wall, opposite the door, hung an oil portrait. A man in his early 60s, gray hair brushed back, gray eyes that did not soften for the painter. Below the portrait, fixed to the stone, a small brass plaque, built by Thomas Whitaker, Master Mason, Hudson Valley, 1985 to 1987. Caroline stepped inside. She did not weep. She walked to the portrait and laid her hand on the corner of the frame. "Aye, Dad." Daniel stood beside the plaque with his father's name. He did not speak. Mason was filming. Upstairs, far above, the doorbell rang. 5:47 in the morning. An hour earlier than the inspector had been booked. Margaret went up to look. She came back to the top of the stairs and called down in a low voice. "It's Vance. He's brought the inspector. And a crowd. And a television van." Vance had known. Someone had leaked, or Vance had followed Caroline north the night before. Caroline rose and brushed the dust off her hands. "Let them come down. Let them see." Mason caught her eye. "Ma'am, are you sure?" "Sheriff. He ran my father's company for 8 years. Today the town watches it end." Footsteps started down the stairs. 3 days later, the 17th floor boardroom of Ashford Industries faced the Hudson on the east and the state capitol on the west. The carpet was a deep blue-gray. The table 18 feet of African walnut. The chairs leather worn into the shape of 9 particular people. All 9 board members were present. Richard Vance sat at the far end with 2 attorneys flanking him. He had been released on bond 36 hours earlier. His face was drawn, but the composure was intact. Caroline sat at the head. Beside her chair, on a small folding table, a stack of binders. The original 12, now in copy form. The originals were with the FBI. Beside them, a sealed envelope from the Bureau's New York field office, marked Preliminary Forensic Findings. Daniel sat in the observer row along the back wall. Navy shirt, no jacket, hands folded on his knee. Caroline had asked him to be there. He had come. Margaret Hollis testified first. She read the letter aloud, all 4 pages, in a voice steadier than her age would have suggested. When she reached the line, "I love you more than this paper can hold," the only sound in the room was the soft hum of the recessed lighting. Caroline presented the evidence next. Chain of custody, timed by Sheriff Mason's body camera, beginning at 5:51 in the morning. FBI arrival on scene at 7:23. Federal custody assumed at 11:04. The expedited forensic preliminary report. Ink dating confirmed authorship between 1985 and 2017. Handwriting analysis matched Harrison Ashford at 100% confidence. Signatures purported to be Richard Vance on transfer authorizations matched against 47 specimen documents from the company's own archives. Then the patents. 14 original filings, registered to Harrison Ashford as inventor, dated between 1962 and 2016, pulled by corporate counsel in early 2017, and replaced with weaker secondary filings on the same inventions. The corporate counsel of record at that time had been an attorney recommended by Richard Vance. Reinstatement of primary status, Caroline said, would restore the company's intellectual property portfolio by an estimated $400 to $600 million. Vance's lead attorney rose. He spoke for 11 minutes. Forgeries, improper access to the vault, compromised chain of custody. Caroline let him finish. Then she opened the FBI envelope and laid the preliminary report on the table. The bureau dated the ink, Mr. Holcomb. The bureau matched the handwriting. The bureau took possession before either I or Mr. Whitaker had touched a single binder. Holcomb sat down. The board chair was Ruth Lynn, an independent director, an aerospace engineer who had served since 2014 and owed nothing to anyone in the room. She called the motion. 5 items: removal of Richard Vance as Chief Operating Officer, and from the board, full cooperation with FBI and SEC. Reinstatement of Caroline Ashford as Chief Executive with founder-class voting authority restored. Emergency forensic audit of all company financials from 1985 to present. Reopening of the death investigation of Harrison Ashford. The vote was called 7-2. The 2 opposing votes were Vance allies. They would be examined separately. Vance stood. His attorney whispered. Vance walked out of the boardroom without speaking. In the corridor, 4 FBI agents were waiting. The cuffs went on outside the elevators. The reporters in the lobby had been tipped. The flashes lasted 15 seconds. Caroline did not follow him down. She walked instead to her father's old office, the office Vance had occupied for 8 years. The door was open. The room had been cleaned out that morning. She stood at the window with her back to the door, looking down at Albany in the November afternoon. Daniel came in. He did not knock. She did not turn around. He was right about everything. He waited 8 years to be right. He knew I'd find him. He knew somehow. Daniel walked over and stood beside her at the window. He knew you'd find my father's son, too. He planned that part. She turned to face him. Daniel, what do we do now? Whatever you need. She rested her hand on the back of her father's old chair. He laid his hand beside hers on the leather. Neither of them sat down. Outside, the wind moved the bare elms along State Street. 2 weeks later, a federal grand jury in Albany returned an indictment against Richard Vance on 14 counts. 3 of securities fraud, 5 of wire fraud, 3 of embezzlement, 2 of conspiracy. 1 of tax evasion. Bond was denied. He was held at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn pending trial. Within 72 hours, the 2 allied directors had resigned. The SEC opened a formal investigation. The IRS opened its own. Deloitte's Forensic Division began a 14-month audit of every company line item dating to 9. Ashford Industries stock closed up 47% over 5 trading sessions on the strength of the recovered primary patents. Market capitalization rose by $1.1 billion. Caroline did one interview with Bloomberg. She refused to mention Daniel by name. She described him only as the homeowner whose integrity made this possible. He did not have to call me when he found the blueprint, she said. He did. That changed everything. The investigation of Harrison Ashford's death moved from cold case to active. NYPD pulled the original toxicology samples out of long-term storage. The preliminary retest came back with a combination of a beta blocker his cardiologist had prescribed and a second substance no panel in 2017 had been able to identify. The current panel matched it to a derivative that, in combination with the beta blocker, produced a cardiac event indistinguishable from natural causes. The file was no longer closed. Daniel went back to Ridgemont. The roof work continued. Caroline began driving up on weekends. She did not announce the visits. She arrived Friday afternoons and left Sunday nights. One Saturday they were at the diner. Daniel and Lily were eating cheeseburgers at the window booth. Caroline pushed the door open and the bell jingled. Lily lit up. Caroline. Caroline slid into the booth across from them. Edna, who had worked the counter for 30 years and had stopped asking customers what they wanted 10 years ago, brought a cup of black coffee, the usual. Caroline thanked her. Lily pulled out a folded watercolor, a gray squirrel on a maple branch, and presented it. Caroline accepted it and tucked it into her bag alongside the small glass jar of pressed leaves. That afternoon, Daniel and Caroline went down to the basement. The vault chamber stood empty now. The gold was in Federal Depository. The patents were in a secure archive. The evidence binders were in FBI custody. The portrait of Harrison had gone with Caroline to the corner office. Only the steel door and the small brass plaque remained. Caroline ran her fingertips along the riveted edge. Your father built this. He and your father. Together. What do we do with this room now? Daniel was quiet for a while. It's your father's room more than anyone's. You decide. No, she said. It's both our father's room. You decide. He thought about it. Make it a workshop. For Lily. I'll teach her down here what my father taught me. The two men who built this vault would have liked that. Caroline looked at him for a long moment. Yes, they would have. Late April. 5 months gone. The Hudson Valley came back the way it always did. Magnolias broke open along the river road overnight in long pink streaks. The river ran high and brown with snowmelt. The light at the end of the afternoon turned gold the way it only turns gold in the second week after Easter. The old Ashford house stood finished at the top of the ridge. The slate roof was new and ash-gray. The porch had been rebuilt with quarter-sawn white oak. A brass plaque, screwed flush into the porch beam beside the front door, read, Ashford Whitaker House. Built 1888. Restored 2026. In memory of Harrison Ashford and Thomas Whitaker, who built things to last. The vault chamber had become a workshop. Daniel's bench ran along the center of the room. Thomas Whitaker's tools hung on a leather strap above the bench. The portrait of Harrison still hung in Caroline's Albany office. The brass plaque with Thomas's name had stayed in the chamber. Daniel taught his daughter elementary stonework down there on Saturday mornings. She was 9 now. Caroline was still CEO. The company had grown 23% in the first quarter. She had sold her Manhattan apartment in March and bought a small house in the town of Hudson, 22 minutes drive from Ridgemont. She lived more simply than her father had. She slept better. The Vance trial was set to begin in June. The Harrison Ashford death investigation remained active. The lead detective had told Caroline privately that he expected to recommend reclassification as homicide by the end of the summer. She was not in a hurry. The truth was the truth. A Saturday in the last week of April, Daniel was in the side yard, building a planter box for the back porch. White cedar, dovetailed corners, no nails. Lily sat on the lawn in front of a small easel, painting watercolors. Magnolia petals had fallen on the grass beside her. The gray Audi came up the drive. Caroline got out with a small paper bag. Lily ran across the lawn first. Caroline. Daddy let me use the small saw today. Caroline crouched down to her height. Did you keep all your fingers? Lily spread both hands wide. 8 fingers and 2 thumbs. That's a very good day then. Daniel looked up from the planter and brushed the sawdust off his palms. He came over. Caroline handed him the paper bag. He opened it. Inside lay a hardback book, brown cloth boards, slightly rubbed at the spine. Christopher Williams, Craftsman of Necessity. First edition, 1974. Daniel turned the cover. On the inside flyleaf, in a hand he had not seen in many years, a brief inscription. For Thomas, who builds without showing off. H.A. Christmas, 1986. Daniel held the book for a long time. Where did you find this? In a used bookstore in Hudson. Last week. The owner said it had been there for years. He didn't know why anyone would buy it. I knew. This was my father's. Your father gave it to him. Now it's yours. He set the book down on the porch. Stay for dinner. I was going to anyway. The 3 of them ate at the kitchen table that evening. The same table where Caroline and Daniel had first sat with Margaret and the blueprint, 6 months before. Lily talked about a beaver she had seen at the pond. Daniel listened. Caroline laughed and leaned back in her chair and looked across the table at him. He was already looking at her. After Lily was in bed, Daniel and Caroline stood on the front porch. The spring frogs were singing in the pond down the slope. The porch light made a small warm circle around them. "They brought us here," Daniel said. She knew which they he meant. She nodded. He moved his hand. Just a little. She took it. Neither of them spoke. They stood looking out over the valley. The small lights of the town in the distance, the river curving silver under a young moon. Neither of them had been looking. But the house their fathers built had been waiting all along, and now it was bringing them home.